Right, welcome to part 3 of lecture 2 for FMGT3224. We're now going to do basic or brief exercise 3-8 on page 91. Okay, so as we look at the exercise, we've got the Alpine House Ski Department income statement, and it's in the traditional format. And then turning the page, on average, skis sell for $700 per pair. Variable selling expenses are $50 per pair. Remaining, blah, 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 blah. Number 1, prepare a contribution margin income statement for the quarter. Okay, so going back on our, looking at our format, how we did this previously, we've got the Alpine House income statement. This is for the ski department. And for the quarter, ended March 31st. Okay. So as far as we can tell, sales are pretty much going to be variable no matter what, right? So we can look at our revenue, and we'll just start out with sales here. And it says on average skis sell for $700 per pair. I'm going to do two side by side. I'm going to do in total dollars on the left, and then per unit on the right. So we said skis sold for $700 per pair, and the total sales $560,000. Okay, so now we've got our less variable expenses. And the first variable expense, cost of goods sold, right? So how much is our cost of goods sold? Let's see. Company does not manufacture its own skis. It purchases them from a supplier for $450 a pair. Okay, so $450 per pair. Oh, wrong line. So $450 per pair. How many did they sell? We don't actually know, but we know that they sold 700 at, the number they sold times 700 is going to be 560. So if we divide these two, we'll find out that they actually sold 800 pairs of skis. So 800 times 450 is going to give me a cost of goods sold, variable cost of goods sold of $360,000. Okay, so, but if we look at the problem, it says cost of goods sold $390. So clearly this is the variable component, and there's maybe $30,000 in there for some other fixed element of cost of goods sold. And we'll worry about that when we deal with fixed costs next. Okay, so then we have selling expenses. And are any of those variable? It says variable selling expenses are $50 per pair. So selling, they are $50 per pair. And 50 times our 800 is going to give us $40,000. Next one is admin. And admin we had 20% variable, 80% fixed. So the total admin was $20,000 according to the problem. So 20% variable of 20,000 is 4,000. 4,000 divided by our 800 is going to be $5 per pair of skis. And that's about it. So if we add all of these up, we get our total variable costs 404,000, and on a per ski basis, 505, which means the contribution margin is 560 minus 404, 156, and 195. Okay, and you'll see the value of doing it on a per unit basis in a little while. So contribution margin there, but now we've got fixed costs. And remember we said we had some fixed cost of goods sold, right? That 390 minus this 360 means our fixed cost of goods sold amounted to $30,000. The selling, variable selling was $50 per pair of skis. Total selling was 60,000, so variable selling was 40. So if the total is 60, then the fixed selling has to be 20,000. And remember, these are fixed costs, so we're not going to do a per unit amount here. We're only really interested in this contribution margin number when we look at per unit stuff. Okay, and then we had fixed admin. And admin we said was 20% variable and 80% fixed. So this is going to be $16,000 here. Add this up. Total fixed costs of 66,000. And so our net income at the end of the day, 156 minus 66 is $90,000, and that is that matches exactly what we had in, or what we've been given in the problem. Okay, so that's requirement number 1. And we've actually done requirement number 2 here. So this is requirement number 1 on the left, total dollar value. Requirement number 2 is on the right on a per ski basis. It's got a contribution margin of 195, or sorry, per pair of ski, rather. And that concludes basic exercise 3-8. All right, so we are now leaving chapter 3 behind and moving on to chapter 8. Which is on the subject of cost volume profit analysis, because it uses the whole concept of fixed and variable costs in some interesting ways, as you'll shortly see. So the basis, or the basics of CVP, cost volume profit analysis, is we take the contribution format income statement and we really try to derive it down, looking at total fixed costs. But we like to use actually the sales and the variable cost per unit to do some manipulation. So we've talked already about the contribution formatted income statement and so on. You can review the points here if you like on your own time. But again, the contribution approach basically says sales minus variable costs give you contribution margin, minus fixed costs gives you net income. And we are going to focus now on the idea of per unit costs, so sales, variable costs, and the $200 per unit contribution margin here, which basically says, look, you sell one more bicycle in this case, and $200 is going to go towards covering fixed expenses until they're all covered, and then the rest is going to go towards profit. In this case, because they're already in a positive profit situation, all $200 of that contribution margin is going to go towards net income. Again, looking at total fixed costs, and we're now going to look at, okay, given that we have this information, is it useful, or you know, if you were modeling and trying to predict things like how many do we need to sell to not lose money or to break even, and so on, and that will obviously drive production decisions as well. You can now use these this per unit information and the fixed cost to come up with a break-even calculation. And it turns out that if Win sells 400 bikes, it will have exactly enough contribution margin to cover its fixed costs, whereby it will have a net income of 0. And so if Win sells just one more bike, the full amount of that contribution will go to the bottom line because its fixed costs are covered, and it will have a net income of 200. If it sells one more, it'll have a net income of 400, and so on. Okay, so that's nice, but who wants to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out what the break-even point is? Well, it turns out we can do this on a fairly simple basis. We're going to go through a bit of terminology first, and then we'll get into exactly how we go about doing that. So contribution margin ratio is just contribution margin divided by sales. And so in this particular case, it's 100,000 divided by 250, or on a per unit basis, it would be 200 divided by 500, both of which give you this 40% number, which we can then use later on in some calculations. So what that means then is, for every dollar of sales, 40% of it, or 40 cents, goes to is the contribution, right? Is the contribution, or goes towards the contribution margin. So if sales increase by 50,000, what's the total increase in contribution margin? 50,000 times the 40 cents will give you, and we'll do it the old-fashioned way here, 20,000 in net income, or 50,000 times the 40% right there. And we're going to look at that. We'll go through a demo problem here. Brief exercise 8-2 on page 357. Okay, so last month when Holiday Creation sold 50,000 units, total sales were $200,000, variable expenses were $120, total fixed expenses $65. Required number 1, what is the company's contribution margin ratio? So we've got sales $200,000, variable costs 120, which means the contribution margin is going to be 80,000, and so contribution margin ratio is 80,000 divided by total sales of 200,000, and that's going to give us 40%. Okay. Estimate the change in the company's net income if it were to increase its total sales by $1,100. Okay, so we got to go a little bit further here. We got to look now at an increase in sales of $1,100, and how much is the net income going to change? Well, $1,100 times our contribution margin ratio, that looks like a plus, that should be times 40% gives us an estimated change of $440. So now we know that it's got a positive net income already, 80,000 contribution margin here, less the total fixed costs of 65. So its net income right now is 15,000. If it sells $1,100 more, its 15,000 net income will go up by 440. And that concludes the brief exercise 8-2, and we'll continue on with the rest of the lecture in the next part.